Bruce, of course, is president of RootsMagic and its author. And tonight's topic is publishing a family history with RootsMagic. So we'll be looking at some of the ways that RootsMagic makes it easy to share your family history with others. And by the time we're finished, those of you who are new to RootsMagic will be up to speed when it comes to reports and publishing. While you RootsMagic veterans out there, if our last webinar was any indication, are sure to learn several tips and tools that you've never seen before. Okay, now just a few questions. Can people hear me out there? Okay, very good. So, before we dive in, let's cover a few ground rules for a webinar. First of all, time zone differences. That seems to be one of the sticky points that we keep getting. We are in Mountain Standard Time in the United States, and if you have any questions about what time that is where you are, you can always go to thetimezoneconverter.com and enter in time here as well as Salt Lake City for the city, and then it'll show you the current time in your location. So hopefully we can help that out and get straightened out for some of you out there. Okay, this webinar is being recorded, and it will be put up later on rootsmagic.com/webinars. Okay, and in fact, the webinar that we had last Saturday, getting started with RootsMagic, was recorded, and it is currently available up there on that page. So if you go there, you can download and watch the webinar from last Saturday. Okay, we have a question about how many people do we have in this webinar currently, and we've got people coming in more and more every minute, around the 700 mark, and based on what we saw last Saturday in our last webinar, that number seems to be going higher and higher. It'll go higher and higher as the webinar goes on. Okay, let's just look at this webinar thing. All of you should have the GoToWebinar control panel. Now you'll see this little green bar. That is your control panel, and usually it's minimized so it's very small. Okay, it's got that little red arrow, little blue button with a kind of a window in it, as well as a little button that looks like a hand with a green arrow on it. Okay, that is how you can interact with us. By pressing the red arrow button, that allows you to open up that control panel. The next button is to put it into full screen mode so that what you're watching will be in full screen, and then that last button is to raise your hand. And then if you click the red arrow button, it will open up the control panel, and you should see something like this. There's a box there where you can type the question that you have. You click the little send button right underneath it, and your question will appear there. Now these questions are not visible to the other attendees. I'm going to be acting as moderator, so I'm going to be watching these questions as the webinar progresses, and I'll try to answer some of them. And if I see certain trends, if there's a certain question which a lot of people are asking, I'll just go ahead and step in and I'll ask Bruce the question, have him address it right there. So yeah, go ahead and type your questions right there in that box, and we'll get to them as well as we can. And if you want to close that control panel, just go ahead and click on that red arrow to close the control panel and pop it back into that small little bar. Okay, so let's play a little game that we played last time over on the attendee, or on the control panel, you've got that little button that allows you to raise your hand. Okay, let's play a game of who is up the latest or the earliest. Okay, so right now in RootsMagic land, it is currently a little bit after 6 p.m. in the evening. And so let's raise your hand if it is after 10 p.m. or before 7 a.m. where you're at. Go ahead and click that raise your hand button. Wow. Okay, so quite a few hands going up. Well, at least over 50 from what I can see. Okay, so let's clear that out. Raise your hand if it is after midnight but before 5 a.m. where you are currently at. So probably about 15 there. And raise your hand if it's between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. where you are at. Oh, goodness. Yep, about the same number of people. Go ahead, those of you who raised your hand, go ahead and type in a question and let us know where you're at. Okay, we've got some people in England. Yeah, England, it'll be the middle of the night there. We're a 7-hour time difference, so it'll be about a little after 1 a.m. there. Yeah, oh, good. Well, welcome, and thank you for making us part of your early morning routine and waking up early or staying up late. Oh, in New Zealand, it's 2 p.m. Well, good. I'm glad we could get a good time for you then. So, okay, well, looks like we are ready to go. So I am going to turn the time over to Bruce, and just go ahead and keep those questions coming, and I will I'll watch them and jump in when I see a common question. So here we go.
Hi, thanks for joining us. As Mike mentioned, this class is going to be sharing and publishing your family tree. And what I'm going to try to do here is start right from the very scratch. Start with importing a simple little Gedcom file and taking that Gedcom file and kind of going through showing all the things you can do to create a nice book. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import my information from a plain old Gedcom file. So I'm going to do that from the Welcome to RootsMagic screen. I'm going to select Import, and I'm going to select Gedcom, and then I'm going to say I know where the file is, and hopefully I do know where it is, and there it is right there. I'm going to import that in. RootsMagic is then going to ask me for the name for a RootsMagic file to import that data into. So I need to create that one. So I'm just going to go ahead and use the name sample. I can choose any of these formats that I want, but I can go back and change those later. So I'm just going to go ahead and create that database. Creates it. I can select any options here, but I'm just going to go ahead and click Open and import this file. If you attended our last webinar, you'll know that this is that same sample file. So again, if you see any names in here that look familiar, they shouldn't be familiar because this is a completely made-up database. So this particular file, I'm going to go in and look at a couple of people. You can see it has some basic information about the person. It has a name, and it has a few basic events: birth, occupation, education, marriage, death, burial. Sometimes when you import data from some simpler programs, you may actually have less information even than that. You may have only birth, christening, death, burial, and marriage information. So what I want to try to do is kind of show you a few things to flesh out your family history to make your book more than just some simple basic sentences, let you put the whole thing together. One of the things that people said they enjoyed learning about last time was color coding. And so I'm going to touch on that just a little bit again, because one of the things you can do when you print a book is if you have a color printer, you can actually have color within your book as well. So I'm going to go ahead and color code the 4 grandparent lines. So I'm going to select the first grandparent line, and I'm going to come up to Tools, and I'm going to select Color Code People. Once I do that, I'm going to choose the color that I want this line to be, and I'm going to say I want that to be for the ancestors of the current person. In other words, I'm going to change the ancestors of the current person to red, and that's all there is to that. I can go through each of the 4 grandparent lines and repeat that. Tools, Color Code People, select the color that I want, and choose Ancestors. And as I mentioned before, this color coding is not limited to just color coding ancestor lines, but when it comes to printing a book, color coding the ancestor lines is a very nice touch. So I'm going to color code each of these lines right here just to kind of give us a start. Now, one thing I did mention before is when you color code the various lines, it's not limited to just these screens. So if I were to go up and do a report, I'm going to click on the little printer button up here on the toolbar. And I'm going to select Charts, and I'm going to do a pedigree chart. Now when I do a pedigree chart and click Create Report, RootsMagic's going to have options. How many generations per page, how I want the numbering to go. Do I want cascading charts? Cascading charts basically means if I have more than the 4, 5, or 6 generations worth of ancestors, it creates additional pages. Let's go ahead and turn that on now. And this is the one I want to show you. Color coding is checked, so I'm going to say Generate Report. When I do that, let's go ahead and narrow that up. When I do that, you'll see that my pedigree chart is color coded. Those 4 lines, red, blue, green, and purple. Now, because I turned on cascading pedigree charts, at the end of each of these lines, it'll say continued on chart 2, continued on chart 3, continued on chart 4, and so on. So when I come down here and see where James Smith is continued on chart 2, there's James Smith on chart 2, and you'll notice this line continues to be in red. And as I scroll on down, there's some more red. Then we'll get into the blue lines, then into the green lines, and then into the purple lines. So doing that color coding makes it easy for me to choose which one of my 4 ancestor lines that particular chart is coming from. You'll also notice that the list of index of names is also color coded. And this is an option that you can turn on or off. Let me show you that real quickly. When I'm in the report viewer, if I want to change any of the settings for this particular report, I can click on Settings, and it brings up the same screen that I had to initially create that report. I can make any changes I want here. In this case, I may want to go into Indexes so that I can see what type of indexes I have, and you'll see right here I can choose whether or not I want the index to be color coded. So I can color code the charts but not the indexes, or I can color code the indexes but not the charts, or I can color code both. I can also in the indexes choose things like how many columns I want the index to be. I can also choose the format for the index. Do I want just the person's name, or do I want their name and their year of birth, or do I want their name and their year of birth and death? So I can easily come in here and make changes and click OK and just regenerate it, and those changes will take effect. The other index, and this is a nice one, is the place index. And what the place index does is creates an index of all of the places that are mentioned within this report. So I can tell it I don't want a place index, or I can have it print the places in the index in the order I've entered them, the city, county, state, country type, or I can tell it to reverse the places. That's the default, and by doing that, what it will do is it will group all the countries together, and within the country it will group the states within that country, and within the states it will group the counties, and within the counties it will group the cities. So it's a nice way to kind of group your place index geographically. So if I were to come back here to the name index and tell it that I wanted it to go to 3 columns, for example, and click OK, tell it to regenerate the report. Now when I come down to that index, you'll see I now have 3 columns for the index. And any of the settings within the report can be changed in that same manner. Now, as long as we're here in this report viewer, let me point out a couple of other nice options. One, you have your thumbnails over here on the side. So you can scroll down through here and get kind of an idea of what each page looks like without having to necessarily go to that page. Now, if you want those thumbnails to be a little bigger, all you have to do is click on this little splitter right here and widen it out. And your page thumbnails are a little bit bigger. If you want them a little bit smaller, you can drag that over and make those smaller. So you can adjust the size of those thumbnails as well. Okay, as I mentioned, the settings button on the toolbar lets you change the settings. Okay, some of the rest of these are fairly obvious. Print. If I click on print, RootsMagic comes up and asks me to set up and go ahead and do my print, and it will send my report straight to the printer. That's fairly straightforward. If I click on save, it will allow me to save this report to a number of different formats. In this case, it can save this pedigree chart to a rich text file that can be opened up in my word processor and edited, or I can save it as a PDF file, which is a very nice format to keep all of the formatting. That's a really good format for sending a report to families members so that they can print it up on their own printer. One that's really nice feature is the email. When I click email, it looks a lot like the save command in that it's asking what format. But what's nice is once I select that, RootsMagic will generate a report and will open up my email program and attach that report to an email. It will basically start up an email so that all I have to do is go in and type the email address and a message and click send, and it will send that report as an attachment. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. The other items here are to switch back and forth from page to page. I saw a little note about show page 13. I assume that means that somebody wanted to see what the place index looks like. Here's an example. This data is not necessarily the cleanest. One thing you'll notice is that the state abbreviations here in the United States are all separated out. That's because this particular database did not put United States as the country. It just did city, county, state. If United States had been entered as a country for the places, those places would have all been grouped together, similar to the way you see here in England. Likewise, if somebody had not been lazy and had actually spelled England out instead of ENGL, this would have all been grouped here with England as well. Okay, there's zoom in and zoom out. That basically lets you see more detail or less detail. And then these let you see it scale to one page size or to the page width size. And then finally there's the close button, which closes down that report viewer, takes us back to the reports to generate. Okay, I'm going to go real quickly and just kind of show you a few of the reports, or show you what types of reports there are. I'm not going to go into detail. Yeah.
We had a couple questions, and you talked about the email reports button where it allows you to email the report as an attachment. Mm-hmm. People were asking, will that work with web-based email or like Gmail or Hotmail or what needs to be done there?
Right, that will work. It does take a little bit of trickery. I did it a long time ago, and I don't remember. Mike knows it. I've been trying to get Mike to put together a knowledge base article on this, and so if you want to see a knowledge base article on that, type that in. No, don't type it. He knows. he knows everybody wants to know that. But it does take a little bit of trickery in order to have your system be able to send those emails through the web-based one, but it is possible because I use it with Gmail to send it through Gmail. Okay, some of the quick overview of the reports. Under the charts, we have box charts, and that's a chart where RootsMagic prints each person's name in a box, a little box, and you can have colors and shadows and all of that, and that can be either ancestor or descendant charts. Now, that is different from what you see down here, wall charts. Wall charts are the big charts that are going to print and can take multiple pages, print on the really large paper. A box chart is similar, except that it prints on regular 8.5 by 11 pages so that it works well in a report. Pedigree chart we just did. Photo tree is kind of the fluff chart where it draws a picture of a tree and sticks pictures of 3 or 4 generations worth of ancestors. Relationship chart is a nice little chart where you select 2 people and RootsMagic shows you how those 2 people are related to each other. It starts with the common ancestor at the top, comes down 2 legs and says these 2 people are siblings, then goes down another one, these 2 people are first cousins, goes down another level, these 2 people are second cousins, and then if the leg continues down on one side, it says these are second cousins once removed, twice removed, and so on. So if you ever get somebody to ask you, how are these 2 people related? How are you and I related? The relationship chart is the perfect chart for showing them not only how you're related, but describing and defining what that first cousin, second cousin, once removed, twice removed thing means. Under forms, we have calendars, family group sheets, individual summary, that's where RootsMagic prints pretty much everything you know about a single person. And in scrapbooks, that's where RootsMagic will print the pictures you have for a person or a family. Labels, that prints address labels. If you've entered addresses, it will print up a list of labels on the Avery label type. There's a bunch of different lists. Don't have time to go through all of those, but this will include things like Onentafel lists, descendant lists, birthday lists, duplicate people lists, things like that. Narratives. This is where RootsMagic writes a sentence for each fact type that you've entered for a person. And we're going to spend a lot of time on this particular report, so we'll come back to that. Reports. Reports are blank reports. That's where you can print blank pedigree charts, blank group sheets, blank census forms, things like that. Or you also have the ability to create custom reports. We're going to have an entire webinar just on creating custom reports in the future, so we'll spend time on that. And then finally, the wall charts, as I mentioned, are the great big charts. So I'm going to hop out of here, and we're going to go in to do a couple of things. When you import your data, as I mentioned, most of the time that data is going to be fairly simple data. So if I were to go into Dr. James Smith, you'll see actually I have a decent amount of information here. But what's nice and what you want to do in order to create and publish this book is you want to build a timeline or a chronology for these people within your file, and then for each one of those items in that timeline, you want to specify more information about that particular fact. So when I go in and edit a person, in addition to the name and the spouse's parents, I will have events that could be added. And I can go add other events. So if I wanted to add another residence to this person, I'm not limited to just that one residence. I could come up to add a fact, and RootsMagic will give me a list of the different fact types that I have, and I could come down here to residence, and I can do it this way where I scroll down and select it, or I can just type the first couple of letters, R-E-S. I can type those first couple of letters and RootsMagic will jump to that particular fact type. Now, if I want to add a fact type that's not in the program already, I can come up here to Design New Fact Type, and I can create a new fact type that I can use over and over and over again. And we'll talk about that in a future webinar as well. So I'm going to go ahead and choose residence. When I select residence, you'll see it has added a new blank residence fact down at the bottom. It just tacks it onto the bottom of the list and puts my cursor up here in on the right side on the live edit, so I can start just immediately typing that information in. So it looked like he used to live at 1234 Main Street and then also at 789 Hilltop, but I'm going to say that from 1920 to 1928 he lived in, let's say he still lived in Ames. So as I start to type, RootsMagic, you can see, is filling in the place based on places that I've previously typed. Okay, that's the place. Now, I also have a field called Place Details, and that's where I can enter that street address. So he happened to live at 9876 Central Avenue. And I can go ahead and save that. Now, when I do that, you'll notice RootsMagic jumped that fact up into the proper location chronologically. So what I'm doing is, as I'm adding facts, whether it's residence, whether it's occupation, whether it's graduation, whether it's your basic birth, death, burial, marriage, I am creating a timeline for this person. Now, if I were to go ahead and print a book, I'm going to go ahead and close this out, and I'm going to come up to my reports, and I'm going to choose to do a narrative report. So I'm going to go ahead and select that and say create the report. Now I have a number of different choices what type of report. I'm going to go ahead and pick ancestors and children. The ancestors are going to give me that starting person right here, and I can change that starting person just by clicking that button if I'd like. But ancestors is going to give me that person, his parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and so on for as many generations as I say. Ancestors and children are going to show me the children in each of those families as they go along. Okay? The descendants goes the opposite direction. That's when you take one of your ancestors that's a ways out there, and it prints that person, that person's children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren coming back along. And there's a number of different formats. Modified register is the format that NGS tends to use. Register is the format that NEHGS tends to use. These other three are what are called indented formats, which basically have a different layout. The modified register and the register reports are grouped by generation. So the first generation is that starting person. The second generation is that person's children. The third generation is that person's grandchildren. The fourth generation is that person's great-grandchildren, and so on. The indented ones, what they do is they group everything as a family. So instead of breaking each generation into a separate chapter, it puts the starting person, and then immediately under that it puts the first child. Underneath that first child, it puts his first child. Underneath that child, it puts his first child, and so on. Okay, so for what we're going to be doing right now, I'm going to do the Ancestor with Children book just to kind of show the this whole thing. Now, there's some options. Yes?
We had a bunch of questions about what does NGS stand for.
Okay, NGS is the National Genealogical Society, and NEHGS, which is the one for register, is the New England Historical Genealogical Society. Okay, so let's go ahead and go into, and we'll just take a look at some of the options. Some of the options are what date format do you want? In other words, when this book is printed, do you want the dates to be displayed as 10 with the 3-letter month and then the year, or would you like it to be more like you maybe are used to seeing in just regular old writing? So it's up to you what format you want those dates. You can also do things like print the uplines. Now the uplines are not going to print in the ancestor report. Those are for descendant reports, and what those do is as you get deeper and deeper into the generations or into the chapters, that will show you the path back to that starting person. In other words, John was the son of Joe, was the son of Al, was the son of whoever. You can choose whether you want to have the preparer's name printed, whether you want color coding, whether you want notes, whether you want photos. And if you choose to print photos, you can choose what you want the maximum size of each photo to be for a person. So if you like fairly small photos, pick a small number. If you like gigantic photos, pick something like 4x4. RootsMagic will use that as the maximum size to fit the photos. Okay, so I'm going to hop out of here real fast, and I'm going to go ahead and generate this ancestor report. And this is a sample, just plain vanilla report. So this Dr. James Smith, we have Dr. James Smith was born on January 3rd, 1907 in Salem Story, Iowa. He lived at this address. He graduated. He lived at this address. From this date to this date, he was a physician. Okay, these are just sentences that RootsMagic is writing for each of those fact types. So when we looked at that timeline or that chronology, these are just sentences written from each of those. There's no notes, no nothing. Well, looks like there is a note here, but I'm gonna skip past that. I'm gonna come back out here and close, and I'm gonna go back into Dr. James Smith's screen. Yeah, and it looks like there's this note, and I'm gonna delete this right here. Okay, so if I were to go back into that narrative report, okay, there we go. Those are just a list of sentences based on the facts that we've entered. Okay, so when I hop out, let's go ahead and start kind of beefing up this. So I have all these facts that I've added. Now I want to go ahead and tell more about the story. In RootsMagic, you have both notes, which is the little notepad, and sources, which is the little certificate. Now the difference between these is that a note is going to tell more information about that fact type, not where the information came from. That's what sources are for. So a note basically tells a story or more detail about a particular piece of information, and a source is going to tell you where that information came from. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select birth, and when I select the birth, I can come over here and I can see the birth date and the birthplace, which I can edit if I need to, but I can also edit the birth note, the birth sources, and other information here as well. So if I were to highlight birth, click on birth note, that's going to bring up the note editor for the birth. Now there's also a shortcut. If I wanted to edit the note, I can click in the little box in that note column next to any fact type. So if I wanted to edit the birth note, I can click right there rather than highlight the birth and then move down and click the note button. If I do that, it's the exact same thing. So let's go ahead and enter a birth note for Dr. James Smith. Now you're going to want to make that note in full sentences, because when RootsMagic prints that narrative, it's going to print John Doe, or James Smith in this case, was born on this date in this place, and then it's going to print the birth note immediately following that sentence. So each one of these notes that you add is going to be immediately following the sentence that RootsMagic prints for the fact type. What's nice about that is it takes, and instead of just having a bunch of computer-generated sentences, your notes are woven in between those sentences to make it sound more like a person wrote it rather than the computer generating it. Now, there's really no limit to the size on these notes. You know, if you make them too big, you know, it may make the book harder to read, but there is no practical limit to the size of these. So let's go ahead and let's put a note in for Dr. James Smith's birth. we're going to say he was born during a blinding snowstorm. He was delivered by his sister because the doctor was drunk and his father had passed out from the sight of blood. Okay, now you'll notice that the word blood, I spelled it wrong on purpose, and you get the annoying little red squiggly underline which tells you spelled something wrong. What's nice about the little squiggly red underline is that instead of having to come up here and click on the spell check button and spell check the whole thing, I know that that one word is all I need to worry about. So I can point at that word and right click and I can fix it right from there. Okay, that's what's nice, is when the little squiggly red underline's there, just right click and fix it right from there. Now we have the spell checking. We also have a thesaurus, and that's really nice in case we decide that, well, drunk probably wasn't the word we ought to really use. So I'm going to just click anywhere in the word drunk and click on that thesaurus, and I'm going to choose a different word like bombed. Okay, so the doctor was bombed. Now, this doctor may have been a family member, and so we probably ought to try to be a little bit careful about this. So what I can do is I can go down here and I can move to right here and I can put in little brackets or braces, the little squiggly braces. And what those little braces do is define that particular phrase, whatever's between the braces, as private. Okay? And when you go to print a report, you can choose whether you want private notes to print or not. So if I'm going to go ahead and save this note, and I'm going to hop out of here. I'm going to go back into the reports. I'm going to go back into the narratives and generate the narrative report. Now, under the options, this is where that privacy, do I want to include private facts? Now, if I just say include private facts, what RootsMagic is going to do is it is going to generate this, and oh, wait a second. Yeah, include private facts. Okay, hold on. Okay, that private fact. Oh, no, sorry about that. Private notes. Do I want to include private notes? Okay, one of the things you can also do is, as long as I'm stumbling along here, private facts, you can actually mark a fact as private, and I'll show you that in just a second. If I tell it to include private notes, there we go, that's better. He was delivered by his sister because the doctor was bombed and his father had passed out from the sight of blood. You notice, of course, it also put in the little braces to show that we were actually trying to hide that or something, just to make sure that whoever we send this to is especially ticked off. So I'm going to go into the settings, back into here, and there's an option, strip the brackets. So if I want to include private notes, I can have it strip those brackets so that it says was delivered by his sister because the doctor was bombed and his father had passed out. Now if I go back out of here again and I tell it do not include those private notes, there we go, was delivered by his sister because his father had passed out from the sight of blood. So those private notes within the braces do not show up. Now I'm going to hop out of here real fast. I'm going to go back in to James Smith and point out, if I click on birth, there's a little checkbox on all of these fact types that says private. And if I mark a fact type as private, when I generate that report, if I say do not include private facts, any fact marked with that private checkbox is not going to print in that report. Okay, so that's notes. Now we can go down through all of these fact types here, and we can add notes to every single one of them. And like I say, there's really no limit to the number of the size of those notes that we would add. Now, second thing I want to do, I want to add a source. I want to tell where this information came from. And we're going to have a whole class on sources, a whole webinar on sources a little bit later. But for now, I'm going to just kind of give you a quick overview on sources. So I'm going to click on this area, and I'm going to enter a birth source for Dr. James Smith. Now, I have two choices. I can add a new source, which means I'm going to type in a source that I never used before, and I have an option to cite an existing source. That's useful if I've typed in the name of a book and I've used that as a source, and then I find more information in that book. I can just reuse that source that I had already typed in for the book and just give it a different page number. So that's what citing an existing source is it lets you reuse master sources that you've already entered. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say I want to add a new source. And RootsMagic is going to give me a list of about 500 different types of sources to select from. Now, this is actually the hardest part of entering a source, is deciding what type of source it actually is. When you select a source type, you'll see over here on the right, RootsMagic will give you a description of what that source is. So an artifact, over here it's telling you that it's a photograph of postcards, wedding invitations, engagement notices, so on. There's a little reference right down here which tells where it came from. Little cryptic thing. EE means this is from Evidence Explained. And it also tells you what section and what page number within Evidence Explained that particular source is described. For those who aren't familiar with Evidence Explained, it's a book that's about 1,000 pages long, and it's kind of the Bible of how to enter a proper source citation. But rather than make you have to go through and figure it out directly from that book, we have added what are called templates based on those sources, so that all you have to do is select what type of source it is and then fill in the blanks. Now, there's ways of filtering this. If I come up here and say search for a source type, if I type in birth certificate, or start to type the first part of birth certificate, RootsMagic will filter it down to the types of sources that have that in their description. Okay, so that you could enter what's called a birth certificate directly. That's from this E exclamation mark, that's from Evidence, the original predecessor to Evidence Explained. In other words, this is the old way to do it. These vital records are the new way to do it. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this for just a second, show you one last thing. Although there's about 500 different kinds of sources in here, 95% of the time there's only going to be 3, 4, 5 of them that you ever really use very much. And so what you can do is you can take the ones you use the most often and make them favorites. So I could scroll down here and I could find book, basic format. That's one I use a lot, just a basic book that has information in it. So I'm going to select that and click the little star right here to add that to my favorites list. And you'll see it put a little star over there, which is nice. But what's better is this little drop list right here that says favorites. When I click on that now, it's going to list all of the types of sources that I said are the ones I'm interested in. So I can go in and take the 4 or 5 kinds of sources I use the most often, add them to my favorites list, so that when I come into the sources and say add a new source, instead of digging through 500 types of sources, I can click on my little favorites list and pick from the 5 or 6 that I actually use. So in this case, I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to add one called Vital Records. And I'm going to go ahead and pick Vital Records Local Certificates. Here in Utah, our birth certificates, death certificates, things like that are held at the county level. So those are considered local. Some places, records are held at the state level, so you'll have a different format for that. So I'm going to say for James Smith's birth source, I'm picking a Vital Record Local Certificate, click OK, and the rest is just fill in the blanks. Okay, the rest of this is basically pretty easy. Jurisdiction, the county and the state. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put Utah County Utah. Now, these source types, there are source types for the UK, for Wales, for a number of different countries. So these source templates are not limited to just the US source types. One thing that's really nice is if there's a source that you want to use that there isn't a source type for, you can actually create your own source types. Or you could go to our RootsMagic forums and ask somebody if they could create one for you. They can create one, and you can actually import source types or source templates into RootsMagic. So the series, maybe I don't know what the series is, I can leave it blank. I don't have to worry about that. The repository, where are these records? The Department of Health in Provo, Utah. Now, you'll notice that when I'm entering this source, it's really two sections. There's the yellow section, which is called the master source, and there's the green section, which is called the source details. Think of this simply as the master source is the part that doesn't change no matter how often you use it. The source details is the part that's going to be different every time you use this source. So for example, if this master source is a vital record, I'm going to go ahead and give it a name, Vital Records, Utah County. What this means is that when I am going to use vital records from Utah County, the jurisdiction, the repository, and the repository location are not going to change. They're going to be the same whether I'm using a birth certificate, a death certificate, or whatever. This bottom section, the source details, this will be different each time I use it. In this case, it was for a birth, so this is actually a birth certificate I happen to be using. The certificate number, the specific certificate number, let's say 123-45. The certificate date, I didn't happen to look at what the birth date was, so let's just put January 1st, 1900. Don't just make up dates. Use the actual date that it should be. And the ID of the person. Again, I don't even remember who I picked. I'm just going to go ahead and put John Doe. Now you'll notice as I fill in the blanks, over here, RootsMagic writes the properly formatted footnote, the short footnote, and the bibliography. It knows what all those rules are. It knows what punctuation, it knows what order, it knows what should be italicized, should have quotes, should be underlined. It knows all of those rules, so all I have to do is fill in the blanks and it will write that source for me. This is about as far as we're going to go here. Like I say, we're going to do a whole class on this. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And I've added birth certificate. Now I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And let's say I want to enter a death information, and let's say it happens to be in the same place. Well, I'm going to go ahead and click on the sources. Instead of saying add a new source, I'm going to say cite an existing source. RootsMagic is going to bring up a list of all the sources that I've ever entered, and I will pick from the one. In this case, let's say it's a vital record in Utah County. It's a death certificate this time. When I click select, RootsMagic already has the top section filled out because that part doesn't change, as I mentioned. And my cursor is already sitting here in the certificate type waiting for me to start. So I just type death certificate, and the certificate number is 98765. The date of the certificate is December 31st, 1990, and the name of the person was John Doe. And that's all I have to do. Click OK, and I now have that filled out for me as well. Now let's hop out of here. You'll notice that as I do this, it's putting little check marks. When I've entered notes, when I've entered sources, those little check marks are all sitting there for me. I'm going to close out. I'm going to go back into the reports, and I'm going to come into the narrative reports, generate that narrative report just like we've done in the past. And you'll see now Dr. James Smith was born in Salem Story, Iowa, and there's a little superscript, a little number 1, meaning that their source number 1 belongs to this particular birth fact. Now on the death, when I scroll over here and look at the death fact, There's my source number 2. Now you'll notice that as I point at the source reference number, the cursor changes to a little pointy finger. When I click on that, it jumps me right straight down to those endnotes. So there's my sources. Here's my sources right there. Okay. Let's go ahead and do, I'm going to kind of go through this a couple more things. Next thing I'm going to do, I've added events, I've added notes, and I've added sources. So let's go ahead and add a picture. So I am going to highlight the person's name, and I'm going to go into his media album. Once I'm in his media album, I'm going to say I want to add some new media. And I can add images, sound, video file. Sound and video obviously don't print, so in this case we're just going to worry about the image. Now if I have never scanned the image yet, I can click on the little scan button and it will run my scanner software and scan the image. I'm going to go ahead and pick disk, and I'm going to go ahead and select a picture. We'll just we'll go ahead and pick this picture. And I can enter a caption and a description. I can enter some other information. We're going to have another webinar just on multimedia. Click OK, and it adds that picture. Click Close. Close again. And now when he's highlighted, you'll notice up here it has his picture. But even better, when I go into the reports and I choose a narrative report and create that, when I generate that, I now have his picture included within that narrative report. So the goals here, as I'm getting ready to try to publish this book, and I want this book to be interesting, is I want to go in and I want to add fact types. I want to enter pieces of information about that person. I want to add notes to those fact types to give more detail about them. I want to add sources to those fact types to show where that information came from, and I want to add pictures to the person to basically give it a little bit more life. Okay. Now,
one more thing there, Bruce. On that, we had some questions about customizing the sentence.
Okay. Yep, we can do that real quick.
Probably don't need to get into that too much.
No, we're not.
Where it's
we're not. When you highlight a particular event or a fact, right down here on the right side underneath the data and the buttons for the notes and sources and pictures, you have a place called sentence, and it's going to show you what that sentence is going to look like. Now, if that sentence sounds weird or there's something that you don't particularly like about it, you click the little customize sentence right here, and that's going to open up a screen where you can go in and customize that sentence. And there's two ways you can customize it. You can either do it this way, where you just have the field names in there and you just change the text in there. The thing that's nice about that is if you ever change the person's name, the sentence still remains correct. Or you could just completely erase this and just put the sentence exactly the way you want it. You know, John Doe, was whatever, whatever, whatever. And you can type in the actual hardwired name, date, place if you want to. Like I say, that way you can get it exactly the way you want. The disadvantage is if you change any of that information, the person's name or the date or the place, you have to go in and redo that sentence. You have to make those changes there. So it's usually best to go ahead and use those fields. Okay, somebody asked about if you want to get rid of a picture. All you got to do quickly, you go into the little multimedia scrapbook, highlight the picture so it has the red border around it, and click Remove Media, and that will get rid of that picture. You can also, if you have multiple pictures, when you go into the properties, there will be one called Primary Photo. So if you have multiple pictures, you use that Primary Photo checkbox to determine which picture it is that you actually want to print in the report for people. Okay, now what I'm going to do is, up to now, what we've done is we've kind of gone through and said, well, here's how we can enter data in order to get the best set of data to make a nice book. We've color-coded, we've added events, created full-blown timelines on people, we've added notes, we've added sources, we've added pictures. But a lot of times when it comes to a book, we want more than just a narrative report. Sometimes we may want narrative in there with the sentences, but we may also want pedigree charts in there. We may want some family group sheets. We may want other types of reports in there as well. Well, in the past, what you had to do is you had to go in and print each one of these things separately. You had to go and print your pedigree charts, then go in and print your narratives, then go print your family group sheets. Then you had to go in and white out the page numbers and renumber them, and then you had to go create an index by hand. But in RootsMagic, we have a feature here called the Publisher. And on the toolbar, there's a little button right here with 3 little books, and that brings up, when you click on that, that brings up what's called the RootsMagic Publisher. Publish a book. And what the Publisher lets you do is define all of the different reports and chapters that are going to go in to create a single book. So I'm going to go and click on Create a New Book, and RootsMagic brings up the Publisher template. Now right now there are no chapters in this book. I can click on Add to begin adding chapters. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Add, and RootsMagic brings up that same report dialog that we've been using all along. So I'm going to come into Narratives, and I'm going to say I want to do a narrative, and it has now added a chapter called Ancestors of Dr. James Smith. Okay, and it's using the same one that I had used in the past. I have my options over here, so I can go in and I can choose my options just like I did before. Okay, if I were to click on Publish Book right now, what it would generate would be exactly the same as when I went in and just did a narrative report directly. Okay, then the advantage of the Publisher, though, is I'm going to go in and I'm going to click on Add again, and I'm going to say I want a pedigree chart for him. And it's added a pedigree chart. Now I want the pedigree chart before the narrative, and so I can select that and click Move Up and rearrange that. So I can rearrange these chapters. I can also go in and select one and delete it if there's a chapter I don't want anymore. So as I select each chapter, over on the right, I can make whatever changes to the settings I want. In this case, I'm going to turn Print Cascading Charts off because I just want one-page pedigree chart for him. I'm going to leave the color coding and that all there as well. So when I generate this, it's going to give me a pedigree chart and the ancestor narrative. Let's go ahead and add one more, and I'm going to go into Forms, and I'm going to say I want a family group sheet. And it adds that at the end, and that's fine. I'm happy with that. And again, I can choose whatever settings I want. Now, I'm going to just real quickly go in and click on Publish Book. RootsMagic is generating my book. Okay, here is that book as I generated. There's my pedigree chart that I requested, and that is page 1. Then it goes in to the narrative. And there's my narrative, and you'll notice that that's actually going, you know, page 2, page 3. So it's keeping the numbering system going. It's not restarting it. It's continuing the book chapters going. Okay, it's going to go through all of those. Then it's going to get to the family group sheet. Then it's going to get to the notes for the family group sheet. Now it's doing the endnotes, or the sources for this, and it's breaking them out. I have the sources that are from the ancestors, the narrative, and then the sources that were used on the family group sheet as well. As I continue on, there's my index of names. Now, you'll notice that a lot or most of these people have multiple page numbers next to their name. That's because they may have appeared on the pedigree chart and in the narrative and possibly even in that family group sheet. So it's going to be an index of all of those chapters together, not just individual ones. Now, if you remember, with the sources, that if you pointed at them, they would highlight. Well, the indexes do the same thing. So if I want to go find out what page Eliza Ann Davis is on, I can point right there, click, and it jumps right to Eliza Ann Davis in my book. So the index is also hot linked. Now it's going to be hot linked both in this report viewer, but it will also be hot linked if I click on save and save that to a PDF file. If you create a PDF file, that PDF file, the index will be hot linked as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hop out of this report, and RootsMagic is asking me for a name for this book I just created, and I'm going to call it My Cool Book. So I now have a new report called My Cool Book. Now let's just go in and show you some of the things we can do beyond just taking a bunch of reports and putting them together. I'm going to go in and click on Add, but instead of adding pedigree charts and narratives and things like that, I'm going to go down to Special Sections. And so I'm going to add a cover page. I'm going to select Cover Page, and cover pages work best when they're the first at the beginning of the book rather than at the end, so I'm going to move it up to the top. The title, this is Bruce's Cool Book, and the subtitle, The Legend Continues. And then I can also pick an image for the cover page. So let's go ahead and browse. Let's go ahead and pick something. Let's just pick a kind of a landscape type picture. Okay, so I've added that. I'm going to go ahead and say Add, and I can add a title page. And we'll just have the title page there. And again, I can put Bruce's Cool Book, and I can fill in the subtitle, the author, Bruce Busby, the publisher, Busby Publishing, published year 2011, published place Springville, Utah. Okay, let's go ahead and add another chapter, special section. Let's add a table of contents. So I've got a table of contents in there. You'll notice table of contents doesn't really have any options because it takes care of that automatically. So I can go and add as many of these different kinds of special sections, dedication pages, preface pages. There's a couple of special ones I want to mention. Blank pages. What that will do is let you choose how many blank pages you want to add. So if you want to have 3 blank pages right in the middle of your book to put something else in, to hand put something in, that's what that will let you do. Text page will let you enter text. You just type in whatever text you want. That's good if you want to put some type of special section in there that's just notes or a story that doesn't actually go in your database. So we've added that. I'm going to come back out of here now, and I'm going to go ahead and click on Publish Book, and it's going to generate my book here for me. Okay, here's my cover page, Bruce's Cool Book, The Legend Continues, with my picture. There's my title page. There's my table of contents, which automatically creates my table of contents from the chapters I've added. You'll notice that as I point to the different chapters, those again are hot linked, just like the index and the source IDs. And so I can click to jump right straight to a particular chapter. Then I go on into my pedigree chart, my narrative report, and as I continue on down, I'm going to get to my family group sheet, my endnotes, my index of names, and my index of places. Okay, so at this point, I basically have a full publishable book. Now, what's nice about this is at this point, I can click on email, and I can tell it to save this as a PDF, and it will automatically let me email this to my family members. I go type in their email addresses and say, hey, here's this book I've been working on. Can you look through it and tell me if there's anything I need to change or add or whatever? And what's great is when they immediately get back to you with those changes, you can, well, we know it's not immediate, but when they do eventually get back to you with those changes, you can come into RootsMagic, go into the various people and make those changes in your database. Then you come right back to the publisher, open that book, and click Publish. You don't have to go regenerate this. RootsMagic already knows how this book is supposed to be laid out. All it needs to do is have you click Publish Book so it can collect the newly updated data and generate it again. Once you're happy with that book, you can save that as a PDF and use Lulu or whatever place you want to actually do to actually publish that book. Okay, so that's basically how you can go all the way from just starting with a simple bit of data, add stories, add sources, add pictures, color code, go through and collect a bunch of different types of chapters and add cover pages, title pages, a bibliography, and put this whole thing together and email it to people for feedback and then actually get it published. What I'm going to do is real quickly here though, I'm going to show you one last thing. If you want to just do something quick and easy, then there's a feature, a publishing feature called a Shareable CD. And what that will let you do is under the Tools menu, I'm shifting gears here, so start thinking differently right here. When I click on Tools, I have an option down here to create a Shareable CD. When I click on that, RootsMagic is going to give me a little bit of information. It's going to kind of warn me that if I create this Shareable CD, if I've got private stuff in here, that private stuff's going to be on that Shareable CD, so it's telling me kind of how to work around that. All I have to do is start filling in the blanks. A Shareable CD, RootsMagic will take your database and burn that on a CD. It will take all your multimedia, your pictures, your sound clips, your video clips, and burn those on a CD, and it will create a little home page that it will put on that CD as well. And that, when you send that CD to your family and they pop it into their Windows computer, it will bring up that little home page and let them actually go right in to a read-only version of RootsMagic that is also on that CD, and they can look at the data, they can go through and they can print reports. The only thing they can't do is change that data. So what RootsMagic is going to ask me for is just information to put on that little home page. So I'm going to call the title My Cool Family CD, and I can pick a photo for the introduction page. I can pick that same picture we used before. If I don't pick a picture, RootsMagic will pick a real nice boring one for you. An introduction, anything you want to say about this CD. It can be about the data, it can be about the CD. I hope you enjoy this CD. It was a lot of work. In fact, you should send me some money for my troubles. Okay, so whatever you want to put in there, click on next. Then you can enter your name, Bruce Busby. You can enter your address, phone number, email, any of those things. The last thing, footer text for reports. As I mentioned, with this Shareable CD that you send to people, they can actually print reports. They can select a person and print a pedigree chart. Well, anything you put in this particular field will print at the bottom of every page they print out. So you could put a copyright notice or something that says, if you want more information, contact, and then put your own information so that if that family member happens to print something out and send it to somebody, that person knows to contact you for more information about that particular data. Once you've filled in whatever you want, you can say preview that CD opening page. This is what that screen is going to look like. When RootsMagic, that Shareable CD is put in, it's going to have your title, it's going to have the picture you selected, and it's going to have a button called View Family Tree. That's where if they click that, it's going to open up that read-only version of RootsMagic and let them just look at the data, print reports, and do whatever. About this disc, that's where you begged for money. And contact the author, that's where it's going to have your name, address, email, and all your contact information. Once you're happy with how this all looks, you say next. RootsMagic is going to go through and collect all of your data and give you two options. Burn that Shareable CD now or burn it later. Burn it later is useful if you wanted to put some other files on that CD before you burn it, or if RootsMagic's CD burner driver maybe is incompatible with your CD burner, you can say I'll burn it later and then just use your own CD burning program to do that. But I'm going to go ahead and click Burn It Now. And RootsMagic was going to bring up this screen, and all you have to do is put that blank CD into your drive. You can also use DVDs, that works as well, and then click Burn. When you click Burn, RootsMagic is going to burn that CD for you, and that's all there is to it. So that's really all there is to creating a CD that you can share with family. Also makes a good backup as well. But so those are kind of your two big publishing options. You can create websites and do other things as well, but the ability to create complete books or to create a CD that you can share with family, it's kind of up to you. You can put as much work or as little work into it as you need. So I hope you enjoyed this. It looks like we have a little bit of time, so we can take some questions. Mike?
Okay, we've got a lot of questions here. Let's see, several people have asked about the shareable CD, if there is a limit on the contents, and if you outgrow a CD, can you burn to a DVD?
If you have content, yeah, if you have too much content for the CD, as you saw on the little screen, it said you can burn it on a CD or a DVD. Now, if you do burn it on a DVD, that DVD is a computer DVD, so it has the same restrictions as a CD. In other words, that DVD, you can't take it and put it in the one connected up to your TV and have it run. It actually needs to have a copy of Windows to actually run that read-only version of RootsMagic.
Okay, and when you burn the CD, can you specify the number of copies of the CD that you want?
Currently, you can't. That's another advantage to that option where it said burn it now or I will burn it later. If you choose the I will burn it later, then you can use your own. It'll show you the folder where RootsMagic put those files so that you can use your own CD burning program, and that will let you specify it so it'll burn however many you need.
Okay, and also regarding the CD, oh, let me see. Boy, these questions are just coming in faster than I can read them. Okay, when you get the CD, can you save a Gedcom with the Get a Shareable CD?
No, currently you can't save a Gedcom. A lot of the people who originally wanted the shareable CD wanted a way to be able to share it with family without them being able to kind of take that data. And so right now it doesn't. We're looking at giving the user the possibility of choosing whether they want it to be able to do that in the future, but right now it doesn't.
Okay. Going back to the narrative reports, several people, they brought up that they would like to print a book where they have specific generations divided up into chapters. So how do you do that using the publisher with the narrative reports?
Okay, where you have a book with different family lines in different chapters?
Right.
Okay, what you would do is in the publisher, you go into the publisher, and I'll just open this existing one. Right now, I have Ancestors of Dr. James Smith. Well, I can come up and I can say add, and I can go into narratives and I can add another narrative. And it can be ancestors, it can be descendants, so I can mix and match this all I want. So I can do Descendants of Dr. James Smith, or I can go in here and I can select a completely different person, and so I can do different descendants of a different person. So there's no limit as to how many chapters that I can add. So I can mix and match narratives, pedigree charts, group sheets, anything I want.
And another person asked if you want, it sounded like they wanted to do something similar with descendants, where they wanted one chapter that would have the main ancestor and then other chapters which would follow each one of the children.
Okay, if you wanted to do that, yeah, if you wanted to do that, that becomes a little trickier. And what you do is you choose the descendants of that starting person, and then you come over here, and for that person, come down here and change that to one generation, or two if you want it to give you a list of those children. You kind of can experiment with this, but you'll do just a one generation descendancy. Then you go in and you'll add a descendancy narrative for each of those children. So if that person had 5 children, you would go add a descendant narrative for each of those 5 children,
right,
as a separate chapter.
Okay, and then there have been quite a few questions about pictures in the narrative reports and in the published book. Like, can you have a separate section just for pictures?
Yeah, you can have a separate section just for pictures. Once again, you kind of have to trick the program a little bit, but what you can do is when you click on Add, you go in here to Forms, and there's an option here called the Scrapbook. And so if I go in and add a scrapbook and select that, when I choose a scrapbook, I can print a scrapbook for a person or for a family or for a source or for a place. So if I wanted all the pictures of a particular person, you know, I can do that, select that, and then come down here where it says select and select which person I'm printing the scrapbook for. And you can see the options right there. You can tell it to print the captions and the descriptions and a number of other options. And so that'll let you print more pictures. Inside of the narrative, you're only going to get the one primary picture per person, though.
Okay. Some other questions. You showed an example of Endnotes, and some people were asking, can you switch between Endnotes, Footnotes, and also the Bibliography?
Right. Yeah. Let's go.
People had some questions.
Okay. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm just going to do this from the narrative report rather than from the publisher, though. When I go in to generate a narrative report, over here on the right, there's some buttons for me to do a few things. Layout is where I'm going to get to choose things like margins, header, footer, that type of thing.
Page size.
Yeah, page size, all of those types of things. Fonts is where I can choose what fonts I'm going to use. But this is the one we're interested in here, sources. If I click on sources, I can choose to not print footnotes or endnotes, or I can choose to print endnotes, which is what it's been doing. It prints all of those sources at the end. Or I can choose to print footnotes at the bottom of each page. So if I choose that and generate that report, when I get down to the bottom of the page, you're going to see right here I have the true footnotes where it's at the bottom of the page. So I can do endnotes or footnotes as well. Now I can also go into the settings to change sources again. There's another tab here called Bibliography. If I want a bibliography, I can turn that on. Bibliography is independent from the endnotes and footnotes, so I can have footnotes and a bibliography or endnotes and a bibliography and generate it that way. So as I come down here, there's my footnotes at the bottom of the pages, and then as I get towards the end, there's my bibliography. And in this case, I only had one source, so there's only one entry in the bibliography regardless of how many times it was used. Okay.
And the endnotes, in the case of a book, endnotes print after each chapter or at the end of the book.
The endnotes print at the end of the book, but let me go ahead and I'll have to do that in the publisher. Okay. Okay. What I'm doing is I'm going back into that publisher so I can show you. The end notes, did I turn? Yeah, the end notes, as I get down here, here's the end notes. They print at the end of the book, but there's a little, they are separated out for each of the chapters within the book. So they will show separately as separate little sections, but they do print all at the end of the book.
Okay. Let's see.
I see a question, can you make another page size besides 8.5 by 11? Yes, you can do that when you are going into the report to generate it. Whether you're doing it from an individual report like a narrative report or here from the publisher, you would go into that layout. When you go into that layout right here, it's going to have the page size. So you can do letter, you can do the A4, A5, you can choose whatever size you want, and as you adjust it. So if I went to an A4, which is going to narrow it a little bit and make it a little bit longer, I can click OK. I can click on Publish the Book, and you're probably not going to be able to tell much of a difference right here, but the page is actually narrower and taller.
Okay. Very good. Well, we are We are just about out of time, but just a few odds and ends. Remember, this webinar was recorded, and we will put it up at rootsmagic.com/webinars. Just give us a few hours on that to get it up. And also on that page, you can sign up for future webinars. We have more scheduled for this month, the next month, and there is also a survey where you can let us know about what webinar topics you would like to see in the future. And sorry we couldn't get to all the questions that were asked in the question box. I mean, with all these attendees, we just a tidal wave of questions, and I've tried to answer as many as I can. If you do have any technical support questions, you can email them to support@rootsmagic.com, and our support personnel can help you out with that. And in the meantime, hopefully we'll see you at a future webinar.